knowledge worker of the future must become a smarter, savvy, security-aware individual, or you'll be a risk to your organization.
That was Brian Scott, President and CIO of Cleartone Consulting. And as he outlines in this chat, your association may be under a cyber attack as we speak.
90% of cybersecurity incidents are at the fault of human error.
So what can be done? With 37 years of cybersecurity expertise focusing on nonprofits, Brian is a trusted voice as the risks we face evolve each day.
People are the human firewall to information in our society today. It's the person, not just the system. So the person needs to have these tools and knowledge.
Stay with me as Brian uncovers the biggest cybersecurity threats facing associations, and he tells us how to keep up. I want to understand a little bit more about maybe a moment that has changed your perspective on cybersecurity. Has there ever been a particular breach or an incident that, I guess, over 37 years, following some of this stuff, has there ever been anything that's actually shifted your perspective and really, changed the way that you approach these things?
Two things come to mind, actually. I think there have been two shifts for me. My introduction into cybersecurity came through the lens of a software developer. I was growing up in technology as a software developer and then responsible for technology and product development. And at that time, quite honestly, security was just a pain in the rump, right? It was just something that, oh, we got to do it this way. Oh, it slows us down. Oh, we can't, move as fast as we want. Oh, we got to take these things into consideration. And I really kind of had a grudge against it, quite honestly, coming through those lenses. It wasn't fun, wasn't exciting. It wasn't building product and, getting out there. And it just seemed like a boat anchor. I like the fact that I had that perspective in the beginning because now I don't, right? But I understand it. And so when I'm talking to IT teams, I get it. I understand where that's coming from. So what changed with that is that when I stopped working for a company, being a CIO that was building product, and then I became a consultant, and I started working with organizations just about their risks and their concerns and addressing risks for their organization from a strategic perspective. I looked at cybersecurity completely different then. It just wasn't a pain in the rear. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a major risk, particularly when I was finding so many associations with so much to do yet, right? They just haven't matured their position very well in many cases. And that made me very nervous for them. And so that started to change where I started looking at it less like just a bit of a pain, but more of something that I could really help with, something that was a real, I would be concerned if I were organization leaders in these organizations. I'm like, we need to help educate here. So that started the shift. Then what really did it for me was I started reading a lot about the globalization and the industrialization of cybercrime, like what's going on in the cybercrime world and how that industry, and I specifically use the term industry because it is a industry, with all aspects of what you would think of required industry. Their supply chains, companies with CEOs and HR departments, all in cybercrime, right? When I started reading about that, I was hooked. At that point, I became fascinated by this world that is taking our world by storm, and how it's matured in a way that mirrors regular business. And a lot of folks don't know this, but if you take the amount of damage, the dollar damage done by cybercrime globally, if you add it all up like a GDP, it would be the third most, large. It would be as much as the third largest country with more GDP. That's how much cybercrime. Yeah, it's massive.
Cybersecurity risks for associations keep increasing. So, what primary factors are driving this continual escalation? Why does it seem like things keep getting worse?
Yeah, it really is that it's the maturing of an industrialized function, in industry, if you will. And they get better and better at scaling out the application of technology and techniques to be effective in attacks. Just like any company that's in industry, right? You get better at doing what you do. You get better at your sales. You get better at identifying new customers. You get better at product development. You get better at implementation. You get better at support of your your customers. All of that stuff is going on the cybercrime spot. There are companies now again that I spoke of that are ransomware or malware companies, access brokers that deal only in just access, and they're maturing, and they do that so that they can lower the barrier to entry so that more people can get involved in the industry and make money through the industry, and then of course it all rolls up, more money is made. And,
Mhm.
so, one cyber criminal by himself can only make so much. He can only do so much, right? But if you specialize and make software and then lease that software and take part of the profits to tens of thousands that are less technical, your profits go up, right? And so, and
Right.
that's what. So, so as they get better, that means the average company has to be better, right? And not be the low hanging fruit. And unfortunately, there is still way too much low hanging fruit out there. It's very easy. And so if you're in a developing country and undeveloped country, and there's lots of these countries where the average income of for a person might be an equivalent of $5,000 or $6,000 of US dollars a year, right? And you have the promise of being able to make 20 or $30,000 a year through cybercrime, through getting involved in these groups. Of
Yeah.
course you do it. I mean, you're just fighting for survival. I mean, so it's just drawing hordes of people into that, and they're preying on the low hanging fruit. And so that became my mission, with 501 CISO, which is my cybersecurity service under Clear Tone Consulting, is let's educate the association and nonprofit industry, and let's help them mature so they're no longer the low hanging fruit that's out there.
I still hear some association leaders who are saying, "Yeah, but we're so small. We're too small. We're too small to be targeted. We don't have anything worth stealing. We're not some huge organization that they probably would be going after." And what we're seeing is that doesn't keep you safe. Being small doesn't keep you safe.
It's true. There are really 3 approaches that cyber criminals are taking to the market, if you will, at the highest level. One, they don't have to worry about maybe, and that's like at the nation state level where it's, nation state against nation state, and they're really trying to get secrets and, critical infrastructure. Yeah. So maybe that has nothing to do with them. That's a whole nother level. But
Mhm.
then when you have these mid to low level hackers that are utilizing these software tools that are available out there, you have the targeted attack where they do find a company or industry or something that they think, hey, I think I have an ability to make money off of this, and they target it. But then there's the spray and pray side of it. So let's look at the target side like it's a rifle through a scope, and they're looking at trying to get someone. But then there's the machine gun, shotgun spray, where they're like, I'm just gonna, you know, th- put a ton of phishing emails out there in general, and just a lot of fishing lines in the water, if you will, and just see who nibbles. And then when someone
Mhm.
bites, they might look at you and say, "Oh, look, it's a small company. Let's only charge them $5,000 for this ransomware." Because they don't have probably much money, and we want to get something. Sure, and that happens all the time. There's a ton of 5, 10K, 20K, $1,000 ransomware attacks that go on. It's not all that what you hear in the news is, someone paying 3 million or something, and it's a big company because news
Right.
gets excited about that. News is not going to be excited about talking about the 5,000 people, right? But to any small organization, if you're a 5-person or a 10-person association and they're saying, "We stole all your member data. We're gonna put it out on on the dark web and announce to the world that you have, poor security controls. It's gonna ruin your reputation. Or you can pay us $5,000 or $10,000." Well, there's a good chance that they would say, "Okay, we'll pay that." You know? So that's where the risk comes.
Yeah, and why do you think that, and do you run into this too? Why do you think that so many leaders still have these misconceptions
Mhm.
that if they just do the minimal or they just, wait and rely on say, we have a CIO. I'm just going to leave all of this in their court and imagine that everything's safe. Why do you think that these are some of the misconceptions that continue on? And,
Yeah,
and what are some of the other misconceptions?
sure. So most of the time, there isn't a CIO, right? Especially when you're dealing with nonprofits and associations, especially on the smaller side. They don't have. Not only do they not have a CIO, they may not have an IT person. Right?
Mhm.
They're just everything might be outsourced. Um, so they don't know what they don't know, right? For one thing, and it's true that cybersecurity is a very complex space, right? So what's going on there, and how aspects of it can be very complex. It's certainly very broad and deep, that's for sure. There's a large body of knowledge, in that space. And so if you're not a cybersecurity professional, which of course no executive director or CEO is, we wouldn't expect them to be, it's a big black box and it's almost a mountain, and it's like, I don't know what to do with that. It's just too
Yeah.
much and it's too big, and so I don't know where to start. So that's part of it.
With all of that, I mean, that sounds really scary, but there are approaches. There are things that our association leaders can do more than just the okay, we have the minimal level of don't repeat your passwords education training, right? I mean, what can they do? What do you suggest to them? Where do they start?
Yeah, it is a complex question, and I'm going to answer it in two parts. One is that because it's such a complex and broad cybersecurity, how to secure an organization, there are no just one or two simple answers to that, right? There's a lot of systems you use. There's a lot of it. There's integrations. There's third party systems. There's a lot of computers out there. So there's it, that in of itself doesn't can't be answered with a few answers. So I'd say in general, it's called what I like to call it turning on the lights. That leaders in these organizations, they do need to find, a cybersecurity third party, assessor, some people that like myself that do this with that's in the budget, right? So that they can get a full picture so that they understand. Because if you just say we're going to do one or two things, you might be missing the five or six or eight or nine or 10 or 15 that are just as important, right? So you really haven't, if you have a pot and it has 20 holes in it and you plug up two, that doesn't really do you any good, right? You're still leaking out, and you got to have a holistic approach. So you have to figure out what you don't know, and that's an assessment to get that to, and then have good advice on what should we attack and how do we do it, right? So
Mhm.
that's that. Now there are things that we still find that I consider the real low hanging fruit that still people might resist. Luckily, for the most part, something like MFA, multi-factor authentication, or 2FA, most folks, will do that now in most areas, which is nice, but it took us a long time to get there. It's a good example of how there is this residual um, uh, lag to to a staff to staffing to people, accepting new practices as part of just the norm of what we have to do. Like I don't want to do that. It's a pain, right?
Mhm.
I'm thinking, okay, expose your all of your data for all of your members and potentially, have all of your files encrypted, or just put in a second piece of information when once a week when you log in. I mean, the trade-off, it's not that bad, right?
Yeah.
So just so luckily they've come pretty well with that. Although here's a good example, even with that, even if you say just use MFA, that's not a simple thing to just say. They might say, well, we have MFA, let's say on our email, like anytime you log in, and so we're good, right? And then there's a lot of questions with that. Well, do you have a VPN into an environment that, that might have some other servers like your file servers and things? Oh, yes, we do have a VPN. Is MFA on your VPN? No, it's not on there. So, okay, so the door that goes right into where all your data is not protected, but your emails are. And so you're good. See, so there's no simple answers that you have to look a little deeper, but, not harping on that too much, I'd say that good password hygiene through a password vault, right?
Mhm.
is mandatory. MFA on everything is mandatory. And then good, solid staff education on identifying phishing is mandatory. Now, all three things of those, if you notice, involve the staff person to do something. I have to
Mhm.
use the vault and keep my passwords in there. I have to put my 2FA in, and I have to realize that this training is not just a pain in the rear and slowing me down. It's important. I need to be able to identify phishing, and we can talk a lot more on why that's so important if you'd like. But it's the truth. I mean, the people are the human firewall to information in our society today. It's the person, not just the system. So the person needs to have these tools and knowledge.
Is that what you come across when you go in and you begin working with organizations? Do you typically see that while they may have some processes in place or maybe some technology in place to try to help them with password protection and stuff like that, that it ends up sort of failing at the people level where there's not this ongoing education? Where does the train usually go off the tracks, I guess?
Yeah. Well, there's a data point that exemplifies that I think is very powerful. And I've seen this data point and it fluctuates from different times. It can be, somewhere from 88 to 92 or 95, I've even seen. But they'll let's just say 90% of cybersecurity incidents are at the fault of human error.
Mhm.
And that either means through clicking on, people clicking on phishing emails and giving their credentials or something like that, or it even means something they're supposed to be doing and maybe they didn't. Like I was supposed to save my passwords in a vault, but I put it in an Excel file, or I
Mm.
was supposed to change the default password of this system that we turned online that had a, but I forgot to change it, so it's just the same default that comes with all of it, right? So everyone knows it. Those are human error or misconfigurations, but human error issues, and that's basically the cause of almost everything, right? And so, so, so
Man.
that it's very important so that they understand how important that is.
It is, and I think that people hear that and they might think, "Okay, well, so how often should I do this training, and what should be included in the training and the education? What does something like that look like for my, say, small staff association?" I'll just use that as an example.
Yeah. Well, any if you're an organization that uses a managed service provider, an IT provider, right? So first off, they should be providing, offering you phishing training services for sure, right? And if they don't, they either should or go get a new MSP. Um, and it's what I see there is far too often organizations. It's like a checkbox,
Mhm.
maybe for their cybersecurity and insurance. There's like, hey, do you guys do phishing training? Like, yep, we got it. And then I'll ask them. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's great. How often do you send? Does your organization send phishing training emails out? I'm like once a quarter, once every 3 months. I'm like, you're not learning anything. It's not
Mm.
happening. It's not. And so, or oh, what if it is once a month? They say, great. All right. Well, do you know what your average failure rate is? And do you have an organizational target that you're talking about? Like, no, we don't know what the failure rate is. I'm like, then you look at it and it's like, okay, so 15%. So every month, 15% of your organization is clicking on these phishing emails and putting maybe credentials in. And then and it just kind of goes on 15, 12, 14, 16, 15. There's no change. So they're not really using it like a real education program, right? Where a real education program, just like in school, like you get tested, you have to get a grade, or there's some kind of consequences, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the professors aware of it, like they're aware. So are our leaders aware? If are people getting better? Are we getting smarter? Are we reducing our risk? Or is it just a check mark? And far too often it's that. So there's a lot of nuances to implementing an actual effective training program where people, it's not just that little pain in the butt, 10-minute video you have to do every once in a while, or look at a phishing email, they start to learn a responsibility. It's part of their responsibility that the organization talks about. And
Mhm.
if they fail too much, so they're not learning, there starts to be some kind of consequences. But you can see how what I'm describing, it's an engaged organization from the leadership through the staff, aware of it, and they're, and it's part of a security culture that they're trying to incorporate. That's a lot different than what I typically find, out there.
I haven't seen where there is this awareness building effort to ensure that associations are kept safer and that their staff is up to date and sort of maintaining that knowledge where it's more than just learning it in one brown bag, that happens a year, and where they can continually grow and learn.
Yeah. Well, you'll see it more and more as time goes on, but you'll find it in organizations that have been hit hard with something.
Hmm.
There's no reporting requirement on this, right? So no one's talking about it. So it's not like who wants to go out into the industry and say, "Hey, we were just hit with either ransomware or we had
Yeah.
or our CEO's email was hacked and and they actually ended up changing some bank account information. We want to tell everyone about it." No one talks about that stuff,
No
right?
one talks about it. Yes. And
So
we
it's
hear about
quiet.
the horrible stories. Oh my
Yeah.
god. It is not the sort of thing you wanna bring up like, "Oh, we had this breach and, we've resolved it," but, nobody wants to talk about these things. And so, do you find that that lack of wanting to discuss and bring these things out in the open is really hindering a lot of development that could be coming, if people were otherwise more transparent about some of these challenges? Or what do you say?
Yeah, I do think by keeping it under wraps like that, right? They're not the industry as a whole continues to kind of lag, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And um, large enterprise are that because that's in the press and everyone talks about it, so they're all very engaged. Obviously, now that doesn't mean they're all doing the right things all the time, but at least they're engaged in it, and it's a topic. Um, I think it will happen as just the natural maturing of consumers. We're going to have more and more security things just kind of pressed upon us, both in our personal life as well as our work life. And so, we'll get there. And hopefully, if there's an incident in a company that kind of turns on the light bulb, if you will, it's a minor thing. It's enough to like make people aware, like we need to do something, but they don't get hurt too badly from it. And that's often what happens, right? It's a business email compromise. A bunch of emails were sent out to your members and your board members, and it was embarrassing, but okay, maybe it didn't do much more than that. And but then we realize, hey, we need to do better practices. And so that's okay.
So much attention is being given to AI when we start talking about technology. But do you have a general rule of thumb on what to tell people when it comes to, when I'm thinking about how much I allocate to developing new things for using technology or shoring up our defenses with technology? Do you have any advice to give on that?
I'm a big supporter of use of AI, definitely.
Mhm.
I think it's like it is very much like, say, the internet. I mean, when the internet started to come into being and people were kind of aware of it, you can't stop it. I mean, it's not something like, I'm not going to participate that. Now some people did, and it just rolled on through, right? And those companies might even be gone in this day because they just didn't get on board. It's very much like the wave that you can't stop.
Mhm.
So instead of just hanging back and being afraid of it, I think proactiveness, right, as a company and as a leadership team is definitely called for there. I'm far less in the very beginnings of these large language models. I was a little concerned about, much more concerned about the security and the privacy of information that was being shared. But I think most of the large language model organizations or companies, they really learned that lesson pretty early on. Like people were really afraid of that, and they wanted to be assured that their data that was being used wasn't being used to be trained, and
Mhm.
shared and things like that, and that maybe they had their own kind of language model space or tenant, if you will, where they could feel a little more comfort putting data in. And they all responded very quickly to that. And I think in general, now I'm not an AI, technology expert, but I think in general they've responded pretty well. You can read through their security and privacy statements. They spend a lot of time saying, "Hey, your data is your data, and we're not using it," right? And
Mhm.
so and they're pretty upfront about that. Now, there's so many vendors out there too, right? You do want to be aware of the
Yeah.
privacy and security statements, and you should have someone look through that, right? So to make sure that there's not some section in there that says, "Yeah, we're going to do this," right? Because if you don't read it, you don't know, and that so that's another thing. So you do have to be careful with that. But I think as opposed to letting an organization find their own way and have shadow IT, where some people are using ChatGPT and other people have Gemini and their personal accounts, and then some people are doing Copilot, and it just goes on, and then it's all over the board, and you don't know who's using what. That's not a good approach, right?
Yeah.
Let's say we're let's create some committees, let's create some teams. Let's say we're going to use these tools now, we're going to talk about them, we're going to use them, we're going to get together if we need to add more tools in or drop some off. Let's just be deliberate about it as an organization, and that will bring wisdom and evolution, right? So
Mhm.
that's, I think, the number one thing that I preach to, or not preach, but share with groups. And then the last thing I'll say is that there's still got to be part of that culture, cybersecurity culture, is there's got to be some common sense added here, right? So let's say for email, we've gotten to pretty close. Not everyone, but knows that if you're going to send an email that has very sensitive information in it, let's say you have some list of people and their birth dates and their driver license number and social security, and you need to get that to someone. You know, you just don't put it, attach it, or write it in an email and send it to them. I hope that most people know that. There's still a lot of maybe education that still needs to be there, but there's a lot of folks that have figured that out. Oh, sensitive information, you just don't plain text email, folks. You find another way. You either encrypt the file and password protect it, or you use an encrypted delivery source or some other way of doing that, right? Well, then you use that same kind of common sense with AI. Or if you're using AI, then don't take real sensitive information and say, put it in there and say, "Hey, let's just dump all this data in and start asking it questions." That doesn't make sense, and you probably don't need that data in there. So
Yeah.
don't do it. Like, can you just not share that part of the information, or anonymize it in some way, or take the sensitive part out before you do it? So just treat it with the same kind of common sense courtesy.
How would an association leader right now start a conversation, broach a conversation with their managed service provider or their IT team and say, "Hey, I just kind of want to make sure I understand that we're doing the things we need to do." Are there any really good questions they could ask to get a sense of that?
I think there's one great question that
Mhm.
everyone should ask, because if you ask this one, it can just stay as one question, as opposed to if you don't ask that one and you're thinking, what are the myriad of cybersecurity things that I should be aware of, then you're into hundreds, right? And so
Yeah.
it balloons very quickly to get a sense of it. And
I'm so intrigued to know the
yeah,
question.
well, that one question is whether you're talking about your MSP, your managed service provider, or any vendor that you want to do
Mhm.
business with, right? And any company, vendor at all, and even your own IT team, if you have an IT team as well, which is, do you have a third party, objective cybersecurity vendor that does an assessment on your entire program on an
Mm.
annual
Mhm.
basis, right? And if so, what does the report say? What can you share with me? Far too many companies, particularly in the association, trade show space as a whole, right, that are maybe medium-sized companies, they still, many of them have now, but there are far too many that still don't get a third party. Um,
Mhm.
so that even goes for your internal team. Like, so that would be the question. Let's say you have a small IT team of 3 or 5 people, and they use vendors to do a lot of stuff. So hey, IT team, have you asked your vendors that? And let's see those reports. Let's see. And do we have key vendors that have access into our space that aren't doing that? That's a concern. And then
Mhm.
for us overall, for everything we're doing, should we consider to do that, right? So that I don't have to just trust George or Sally or whatever, and whatever particular level of information they might have. Don't have to trust them. I'm going to take an objective party. They're going to report back to me where we're at with the situation.
I really love you've brought up several things in your answer with that, which I think it's a great answer. That relationship you have with your third party vendors, with your partners in the industry that are providing tech solutions. You've mentioned it a couple times in our discussion today. One having to do with education, and two, in looking at the agreements and actually working with them and asking those partners these questions to make sure that they're covered as far as their security is concerned. Talk to me a little bit more about that role and what you've been seeing too, because I think that relationship is also really interesting in that they are becoming more and more important the more ways that we can use the data that we have and the more access that some of our partners and consultants of all stripes have, the access that people have to the data in associations.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Um, it is shocking. I think at times that any organization would take their most important data and just allow access or give it to another company, right? Without first asking more or requiring that they do these types of assessments to ensure that they're doing what they do or what they should do. There's a common vector for cyber incidents is through the supply chain, right? So through
Mhm.
people who work for other people, who as a vendor or supplier, that's a really common way to get through. Because often you start the customer might be a little bit bigger, and then the supplier is smaller, a little less mature, and so that's an easier way to get in. So it happens all the time. And again, it just comes down to that question of like, are you doing this? And what can you share with me about that program?
When people are looking at some of the threats that are coming up and they're looking at planning ahead and thinking about, okay, if I can make it past 2025, looking into the future, what emerging threats should forward-thinking association executives be preparing for now? Where should their minds be?
Yeah, I think AI plays a big role in that, right? I mean, we all remember the day, and it wasn't that long ago, right? Maybe a couple of years ago at most. And you used to get these weird emails that you could barely read because the English was broken so much and it made no sense. And you're trying to figure it out, and you're like, who wrote this? Well, obviously a non, English speaking as their first language person did, right? Well, those days are long gone. I mean, it doesn't matter what country you want to attack as an attacker now. You
Yeah.
can deliver a perfectly crafted email, right? And that was the first wave of application of AI into the phishing side of attacks, right? But now we have deep fakes that are going to come on after that. And so the more and more that video call becomes just a part of our life, and that video as a whole as a part of our life, that's going to become even more prevalent. Where you might have a video call, it won't be long, and there'll be the technology where in real time someone's maybe voice can be or sound like, and their face can even look like someone else, and you think, and you're talking to them. We're not far away from that. It's not, maybe how many years? One
Yeah.
year, 2 years at most, probably, and that's going to be really prevalent. So now you don't know who you're talking to and what's going on, and they're all wanting you to do something that that might be dangerous. So it's just going to get harder, right? And so what it's all going to fall back again, of course. There is technology that we deploy as IT professionals and security professionals that tries to do the best we can to protect. And
Mhm.
um, I was just looking with a client actually this morning, and that we were looking at the stats about every month. It was something like 1,000 emails were stopped that had malware in it.
Oh my
Every month,
gosh.
there's 1,000 emails that IT was stopping, right, that had malware in it. That's on a monthly basis, but still some gets through, right, of something. And so we need that the worker, the knowledge worker of the future must become a smarter, savvy, security aware individual, or you'll be a risk to your organization, right?
Mhm.
So it's upon us to find better ways to engage them, train them, make it interactive, and so I try to do that. And when I have discussions and trainings, and I even try to have some fun, like if I'm speaking at a conference or something, I try to actually do fun things around cybersecurity. You might think fun, like what? Yeah, it's strange. How can you do that? And it's not easy to do, but I try my best to do that because we have to find ways just to try to like lighten people up and engage them, or they'll continue to be at risk.